Are you a business owner stuck in fear, doubt, and worry about what the marketplace will look like in the future? Then this show is for you. Strap on your seatbelt and get ready to disrupt and innovate. Here's your host, Lisa Levy.
Welcome to the Disrupt and Innovate podcast. Today, I have the honor of hosting Victoria Pelletier, a trailblazing corporate executive, board director, #1 best-selling author, and a professional public speaker. She's known as the turnaround queen and the CEO whisperer. Victoria is celebrated for her ability to inspire and empower teams to drive growth in business, leadership, and culture. With over 2 decades of experience, Victoria shattered the mold, becoming one of the youngest chief operating officers at 24, a president at 35, and CEO at 41. Her remarkable achievements have earned her numerous accolades, including recognition as one of the 100 global outstanding LGBTQ executive role models by Involve, and a 2023 Woman of Influence by the South Florida Business Journal. I am so excited to delve into Victoria's extraordinary journey and glean insights into leadership, personal branding, and building cultures of resilience and inclusion. Victoria, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Happy to be here.
I'm so excited to share your story and your journey. So I do a formal read-in, everybody gets that, but tell us a little bit about who you are and what's brought you to what you're doing today and why it's so important now.
I'm going to try and be as concise as possible. It makes me feel really old when I talk about this really long career that I've had and where I'm now focused. You did state I became an executive in my first role at age 24, but it started well before that. So I started working at age 11. My first leadership role was at 14 as the assistant manager in the shoe store I worked at while I was in high school. I best laid plans to be a lawyer. But some of the best advice I give to people is around following your passion and purpose. And it turns out I loved the corporate world, which I was working at all throughout university, and got promoted up through the ranks exceptionally quickly. So what I thought was putting off a year before law school ended up never coming to fruition because I really loved the complexities of business, and particularly when I moved into the world of B2B professional services, which is where I've now spent the majority of the last 24 years since that first executive role. And I do sit on multiple boards. I spend a lot of time trying to both invest or coach and mentor founders, particularly women and minority founders. But beyond that, from a corporate standpoint, you named a few of the other things I do, like speaking and authorship. I'm a wife and a mother, and I've raised 2 really beautiful humans. That also makes me feel old when I share with you that they are now 24 and soon to be 20.
I feel that it resonates deeply for me because the humans that I influenced came into my world. They were teenagers, but they're now in their mid-20s. And I don't know how that's possible because I'm in my mid-20s, right?
Yes,
Okay.
right.
I can still pretend some of the time. So with the journey, Victoria, what are you doing right now? What are you building and how are you helping your clients?
So I have had a life of being a corporate executive and usually owning businesses. So I've built and bought businesses. I reflected on it and I clicked in. I'm like, why wasn't I talking about the first one I bought? I was age 20. I bought the casting agency that represented me because I was an actor on the side as well. And so I'm currently in transition as it relates to that sort of C-suite executive role, looking for an opportunity to come in where it's aligned with purpose and passion, great culture. And if I'm coming in as the CEO or one of the solid, number 2s or 3s in the company, really shape and influence that because I'm maniacally focused on building the right kind of leadership teams and creating a place of inclusion and belonging for people that drives great culture. I also do my side hustle, if you will, is doing coaching on a limited basis to executives. Normally they're referred to me. I don't advertise generally broadly for that. I do some personal brand coaching that's very much connected to a lot of the work I do as a public speaker. I'm finding more and more people want to step into that. So trying to give some advice on that. And ultimately, my focus when I think about my own brand and where I spend my time is much more on legacy and impact. When I die, I don't want them to speak around all the mergers and acquisitions I've done and revenue and profitability that have been driven. I want it to be spoken about that I left the workplaces, community, and world at large a better place by being an authentic, whole human leader, and also being one who very much focuses on social justice and equity as a whole.
So let's dig in and play with that a little bit, because legacy ties directly to purpose, right? Our P&L is one thing, and it's important, right? Our businesses have to, generate revenue and profit to continue to be businesses. But there is that certain point in time where the look is bigger, and the scope of that is just a little bit different. And with this podcast, we're talking about things that are disruptive and driving innovation, and being purpose driven and leading with the idea of legacy really starts to change choices and how they're made inside of a business. And it's a broader perspective for a leader, a CEO, a president, to actually come with it from the perspective of what we're doing today is going to mean something 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And it isn't about just the dollars and cents of the business, and ties more purpose and people. So let's talk about purpose and people. As you've built teams over the last decade or two, how do you make the choices? How do you build the right teams of people? How do you get the right players in the right seats?
A multitude of ways, but ultimately I try and surround myself with people who are smarter and better at, particularly at the things that I don't know. I think of when I stepped into that first executive role, chief operating officer, but I owned all functions of the business except for finance. I came from an operating background, and now all of a sudden I had HR and technology and sales all reporting into me. So very quickly, I, recognized to be successful in that role, there were some people in some of those roles already, identify if they were the right people to remain in those roles. And in some cases, I needed to hire people that came with much more depth of experience. And I was a young executive. I'd worked for a number of years at that point. The other thing would be recognizing and being authentic and vulnerable and saying, I don't know what I don't know. And how do we complement and create? And for me, it's also been around creating diverse teams as well. I recognized a long time ago the value that comes not just by doing the right thing, but not creating diverse workforces and diversity from all the facets, not just the traditional ones we think of like gender or sexuality or religion and those kinds of things, lived experience, working in different countries, those kinds of things. It brings a richness and creates much more innovation, problem solving, and then creating an inclusive environment where people feel a sense of belonging, creates greater retention, productivity, and drives top and bottom line dollar. So that's been how I focused on building teams. And last thing I'll say is, but connected to diversity, is hiring also for potential and propensity to learn. People who come with all these other things, but might be missing a few of those key skills, is incumbent on me as their leader to bridge the gap.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And we have lots of conversations around the person in the role versus the job description. And I hold a belief that job descriptions outline the lowest common denominator for that role. And yet we often hire people into that, and then there are environments that then measure against that in a punitive way. They weaponize a job description. And that's a personal pet peeve of mine. But as we look at that idea, right, the potential within people, that is it's imperative as leaders going forward that we understand nobody can do everything. We're going to have areas where there's opportunities for growth and for learning. And as leaders, hiring people in with potential to be greater than what we think today is, because we want them 5 years from now to be doing something even bigger for us than what we're hiring them for. So it's a changing mindset, I think.
I agree with you completely. And it seems like as you and I are talking about it, quite simple, but the reality is I'm finding it not happening, in great scale and practice in many businesses. There's been a little bit more of a shift towards that over the last number of years, although sadly, some of it I think is rolling back here in the US as we start to, peel away DEI programs and leaders and that, sit to help guide some of those things. But I say simple. I'm probably oversimplifying. The reality is you need to find leaders who can identify those with potential, those with a growth mindset, those with curiosity, and those who want to go beyond the job description.
Absolutely. And you just hinted at, right, in our world right now where we are sort of rolling back some of the things. We'd made some growth and we made some strides, and it's being challenged. One of the phrases that frustrates me in this space, and it's always from a well-intentioned individual who says, but we always hire the best person for the job. It just so happened that that person may have looked more like me than not like me or whatever. And it's like, I'm frustrated with that mindset because it's not necessarily actually true, because they weren't looking.
I agree with you completely. And so I challenge people who, yes, say that, but also those who say, like, there wasn't a diverse slate that was presented to me. Well, then you weren't looking hard enough and you were not looking in the right places. And to our last point, you weren't prepared to create some flex, to create diversity and bridge those one or two skills that you might have felt was lacking compared to the person who looks like you.
Absolutely. And it's also so refreshing in those instances. And I'm thinking of a client environment I stepped into and actually walked into a diverse leadership team inside of technology. And I know I sat around the table there and I looked around. In my background, I started out in that space and I was just floored because they had an intentional CIO who did look, and who did look beyond very much his, and he's a very much a white boy. And not necessarily an old white boy, but he's definitely, and he, with intention and purpose, cast a wide net. And that team, in kind of interviewing them and talking to them about what they were doing, was freaking fantastic. And I love to see that because so often I go into environments to fix things that aren't working. And in this one, right, the first sort of look at things was like, we're just leveling things up. And that's fun to see because it's still an exception and not the rule.
I agree. And I've spent a lot of years working in tech as well. Yeah. And I think there's an intent there, there was, and I don't think I'm breaking confidences. And as your listeners will hear this, as I say what I'm going to say next, I was working for IBM and we were very, intentional about making sure that we were bringing in diversity, at least from a gender perspective. And this is when I was living in Canada with IBM and I moved back to the US with them as well. I remember there was one year and I was so proud of this. 53% of our new grads coming out were women. I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. But then probably the following year I was sitting, and now this says something around hierarchy. What do we need to do to create the right kind of environment? So at a senior level, I was leading a strategic planning meeting and walked into our largest boardroom. Me, one other woman, and 40 men. So we still have like so far to go, but that also is, for me, you use the word intention, which I love, Lisa, because I often talk about strategic intentionality. Yeah. For a multitude of things. DEI is one of those, your brand isn't that but strategic intentionality. And in this case, I see so many, and I'll spend some time consulting with clients on their DEI strategy broadly, focused on the front door of recruitment, but don't evaluate how many are leaving out the back and that middle stage. What are we doing to create the environment for, particularly for women and for those who choose, and we find a lot of it, parenthood. And what does that dynamic look like as they want to progress the ladder?
Well, and especially when we have all the statistics that show that as women start to make choices and step away, they may not ever come back. And they're stepping away oftentimes when they're in that middle management tier, and being able to actually get the growth into the C-suite, heaven forbid parity at the executive level. We can dive into that one if we want to or not, but right, the data shows that women growing through and into executive careers is hindered most often when they start to have children. And I guess from a personal experience, I didn't have kids and was climbing that ladder and remember very clearly an incident, complete technology outage. It was Easter Sunday. I led the project management organization. I am not a technologist. And my cell phone was the one ringing because I was a single woman with no kids and the easiest person that they could get to go in and have leadership on site.
Mm.
And it's like, that's like a double backhanded slap, right? It's like, anyway, but it is hard. And so to coach, and I love that you're coaching teams to be intentional and they're strategically intentional on how they're career laddering and building those experiences. It's not about getting people in the front door. It's about growing and elevating throughout a career in a time when most people don't stay in one employment situation for more than 2 years.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny. I actually, as I said, I'm in transition and having conversation, and someone asked me, uh, they're like, I should just probably preemptively ask around sort of your movement. And I said, what do you mean? Like my average tenure is around 3 years, and I've been through 40, or sorry, for the companies I worked for or companies I've acquired, probably a little over 20 mergers and acquisitions, many of them driven by that. I'm like, the average tenure is 2 to 3 years. Said, so in my generation, maybe not, but just let's be clear. So I said, I'll explain the moves to you. But so I thought that was funny, that they would, even be asking that. The other thing I'll say, Lisa, is I do find, as much as I'm talking to companies around their strategic intentionality around DEI and B belonging, I actually find myself having a lot of conversations with women and coaching them over what does that look like and around compromise and trade-off that they will allow themselves to make to be able to do both. And because I think too many of them don't allow themselves and choose to make some decisions. And so maybe I'm a little bit controversial in that, but I will push them a little bit harder on that as much as I do the companies to create great environments for those that choose to be parents.
Well, and I'll roll this out because it's for those who choose to be parents, and there's a percentage of the population that are stay-at-home dads and make that choice.
Exactly.
And you got to love that. But there's a lot of talk about work-life balance, which I think is a fallacy. I think, right, it's really a juggle. It's the story of imbalance and how you manage that and where you are willing to give of yourself and where you're willing to receive discomfort in negotiating all of that. So having those conversations with and coaching women through that is really important because there is no such thing as the balance.
No, I agree. I hate being asked, how do you balance it all? I'm like, no, 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 no. First of all, it's work-life integration. And reality is it's actually just all life. And so it is compromise and trade-off, this notion of having it all. I also don't love being asked that question. The reality is you can have both. You can be a successful family person and career individual. But there are going to be times where you have to make those trade-offs. And I think um, you'll hopefully know, and over your life, you'll say it balanced out those compromise and trade-offs. Like I can say, that first executive role I stepped into, I was a brand new mother. My older son was only a few months old. And then later when I had my second, I remember that year, the kids were 6 and 2, and I spent 220 days traveling for business. One, it'll tell you that's how many business days there are. I didn't take any vacation. And so I missed a lot. However, when my ex passed away almost 11 years ago, and we were divorced, but co-parented well, and I was a single, I had a job that I loved, but still had me traveling an exceptional amount. And I made a decision to give up that role to go to one that wasn't quite as exciting, but had 10% travel for my children to be home, who were 13 and 9 at the time. And so that's what I think as, parents, again, those who choose to be parents or those who like you come into it, through, partnership with someone else that you're going to make. And I just hope that my kids would look back on it and recognize that when it really mattered, I was there. Did I miss some hockey games or like recitals? Yes. Yes, I did. But I provided a life for them and was there in the much needed times.
And so bringing it back to, right, sort of where we started with the conversation, setting the tone for your legacy. No parent is everywhere all of the time. It's impossible. Everybody misses pieces along the way. But being able to have the kids reflect back on and say, mom was there when it really mattered. Mom was there when she said she would be, right? So there's the negotiation that happens of, you have 3 different events in this upcoming week and I'm on the road. Which one is most important to you that I'm there for, right? And making and honoring that commitment. Those are the things that matter. And that brings that tone for legacy for you and what you're building professionally and personally, and finding that integration of life in all of its uck and joy, that is all one big package that we live with. As you start and you're speaking, right, what are the topics that you're keynoting on? What are the things that you're bringing to audiences that matter?
The one I delivered the most is called, it's my Unstoppable talk. And Unstoppable is my life like philosophy and mantra. I happen to be approached to co-author a book with that title. I'm like, heck yeah, that was meant for me. And that one's a story of I overcame pretty extreme trauma and adversity in my youth. And how you can make some choices, and with that, so it's motivational, it's inspirational, but I also leave some real life lessons, and beyond the resilience that came out of that experience, some of the other things I've learned to help me, achieve some kind of success in career and life. So that's one. I do one around DEI and strategic intentionality, one on personal brand, one on what I refer to as whole human leadership, in a very different way to be leading in what I used to refer to as the future of work, but the reality, it's all here now. And the last one is one just very specifically on resilience and healthy resilience. Actually, really excited to be doing a TED Talk on that in 2 weeks' time.
That's awesome, because I think that resilience is a great word. I talk about it in terms of adaptability, right? We all have the way that we bring these ideas to play, and sharing and having these conversations for an audience that we don't actually get to see their reactions. We can hope that we're hitting some notes, but with this, you are talking and sharing, about leadership. You've shared with the audience today about the importance of legacy and whole human leadership. And I like that phrase. And I don't know that I've used it or heard it used often enough, because it is about everything. It's the good, the bad, and the ick that makes up who we are, and how we show up each day, whether it's in our personal lives and our professional lives. That whole human is us. As much as we pretend we might want to compartmentalize, we really just don't do a very good job of that. And the harder we try, I think the less we show up, or we show up flawed and imperfect, and not in the good way of being authentic, in that legitimate sense. Victoria, when you look to the future and the work that you're trying to do, and I know that it's constantly evolving and shifting, but looking out into the next 3 to 5 years, what are some things that you hope to see in the business environment that might not be there? We might not be there yet.
I would love to see a shift more to the alignment of, and you said it earlier, the phrase of like purpose and people.
Mhm.
And I say that, and I think many companies say that and strive for it, but particularly the larger publicly traded companies and those with large shareholders who are expecting quarter to quarter returns make huge trade-offs that compromise that consistently. So I'd love to see us get to a point where we recognize that things like DEI programs is not just the right thing to do. It actually drives business outcomes. So we should be doing it. To the focus on people. Let's not allow toxic top performers to remain if we talk about having and wanting to have a great culture. So I would love to see more of that. I would hope to be able to impact more of that with a larger and larger platform, and even this next role that I might be stepping into to influence that within the company that I'll specifically be leading it.
And I love that you called out in that the difference, right? The very large, let's call them the Fortune 500, 100, whatever. They're big, they're very much broken and toxic, and they get a lot of press coverage, right? We hear about what their CEOs think, and most of it makes me cringe. But I bring it up, and it's ironic because it's in almost every conversation recently that we're having on the podcast that I bring them up, because you are influencing, as a serial entrepreneur, the businesses that actually drive our economy. Really, You don't get the press coverage. You don't get quoted every time you have a brilliant thing to say or just a really loud thing to say, as some of them are just simply loud voices. But you are growing and building businesses that make a difference. And they are the ones that drive the US economy. Small businesses always will. And so the influence, we have to be a little bit more clever. You have to be a little bit more creative. And you are out there doing it, leading it, building different companies, acquiring and divesting those, and influencing others. So Victoria, I would like to say thank you for doing that, because it does make an impact. And someday we will figure out how to get the quotes and the sound bites that all of the big guys get on a regular basis, because you are making a difference. And with your writing and your speaking and continuing to coach and advise and lead great companies, it does make a difference. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
If there are members of the audience who are interested in what you're talking about, what are the 2 easiest ways for them to find you?
Well, jokingly, I'll say Google me, because I focus so much on brand. I'll come up on almost all of the first many pages. But put joking aside, I do have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'm sure it'll be in your show notes, so no one has to worry about spelling that. And if they want to connect with me on other platforms, they can connect directly from there.
Fabulous. Audience, this has been a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed the ride. You know the rules. Don't get left behind. Join me next time.
That's it for today's episode of Disrupt and Innovate. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Every single week, one lucky listener that posts a review on iTunes will win the grand prize drawing, a $15,000 private VIP day with Lisa Levy. And be sure to head over to disruptandinnovate.com and get your free copy of Lisa's gift, and join us on our next episode.